I've decided that I need some kind of opening phrase. I know a couple of weeks ago I mentioned that I needed an outro phrase, like Chris Hardwick does on Nerdist, like enjoy your burrito, so you know that the podcast is done, especially during an interview. But I think there needs to be an intro. I was editing one of the podcasts for the YouTube channel, and I felt that the intro was weak. Just jumping into it, I think the brain needs something. You need to be prepared for what's about to happen to you for the next 8 to 10 minutes. But I'm going to have to work on that. And to connect the dots of the last few podcasts, during my intros and outros, you may have heard me mention that I wanted to dedicate an episode to Amazon. It started during the China interview with John Drum. I felt like there was an interesting parallel between the Chinese government and how Amazon is jumping through all these different industries. But that interesting parallel, that wasn't enough to sustain an entire episode. Thankfully, Amazon has been making the news for a couple of different reasons, and they were all over the press this week because they have a top 20 finalist list for their second headquarters. And if I mix up all of those various news items and topics, you lucky listeners, you get another episode dedicated entirely to Amazon. I know you're so excited. All joking aside, one of the cool things about doing this podcast is that I make these episodes in real time. And as the days and months go on, and as more information comes out, my opinions change or they mature. So a few months ago, I was pretty adamant that Amazon is not a monopoly. I am starting to have some concerns about the way they are moving from industry to industry and what that means for everyone else in their wake. So this week, we're discussing, are we all going to end up working for Amazon? I'm Joey Lombardi, and this is SourceCast episode 104. As I was gathering information and articles for this podcast, there was a couple of older articles that I discovered that kept joking. They were joking that we're all going to end up working for Amazon. And you know when you get that uneasy feeling because it's kind of a joke, but it's also feels like it could happen? That's where I've been at lately. Jeff Bezos and Amazon have ambitions. They have a clear strategy, and they are executing against it to get what they want and to get Amazon in the position that they want it to be in. And it's not in just one area. It's not just retail. It's IT with the cloud. It's healthcare and advertising. They're basically going to own a city when they're done with this HQ2 situation, and we're going to get into all of it. Let's start with the cloud. I've covered Amazon in the cloud in multiple podcasts throughout the last year. To make a long point short, at the moment, according to research firm KeyBank, Amazon currently commands 62% of the cloud market. I've made this point before in previous podcasts. I'm going to make it again, especially in light of some of the security issues that have come up with the chipsets with Spectre and Meltdown. If 2/3 of all internet traffic is going to one system and one service, that makes them a larger target. So anybody who's currently hosting their infrastructure on Amazon, it's really not a bad idea to look at alternatives. This is not me knocking Amazon for just the fun of it and to make an interesting podcast. If I'm a hacker that wants to make a statement, you make a much bigger statement taking out the biggest dog, and it's the biggest dog by far. And meanwhile, there are other services like Google who are investing in things like security research that maybe Amazon isn't as good at. So if you're worried about Spectre and Meltdown and how it impacts your services and how it impacts your CPU cycles, Google apparently has a fix that doesn't eat as much CPU and doesn't impact the services as much, and their stuff has been patched since the beginning of the summer. Amazon may make it easier to buy cloud services from them. It may be a little bit cheaper. It really depends on the day at this point. But if you are buying cloud services, it's not a terrible idea to mix your portfolio around and get to know the other providers and start to think about alternative hosting solutions. And to make the point about monopolies again, this isn't a monopoly situation because there is competition. You have Microsoft, you have Google, and the fact that there is competition is ultimately driving prices down in the cloud, which is better for the consumer. Amazon has some kind of special sauce that keeps driving consumers and enterprise users to them versus their competition. And the concern is, at least for me, is a too big to fail situation. They're going to get so big, it's going to become an industry best practice to use them, and it already is, that no one's going to think about going somewhere else. And that kind of thinking makes you susceptible to risk. So let's pivot to another competition point, retail. Amazon is by far the leading e-commerce engine in America. They do have competition in physical retail space with Target and Walmart. But as the holiday season ended, there were a series of articles that came out that said retail did not do great in Q4, with the exception of Target. Target had a very strong Q4 holiday season, which of course leads to rumors that Amazon may be interested in buying Target. There's a Gizmodo article from the beginning of January, written by Rhett Jones, that lays out this crazy theory that there is some possibility or some minor interest that Amazon could theoretically buy Target. The rumor is being driven by Gene Munster, who is a market analyst, and he had some success predicting some Apple stock performance, and people still listen to him. The Gizmodo article sort of makes it seem like he's unique. Let's use the word unique. Munster publishes a report, and here's the quote about Target. Target is the ideal offline partner for Amazon for 2 reasons: shared demographic and manageable but comprehensive store count. As for the demographic, Target's focus on moms is central to Amazon's approach to win wallet share. Amazon has, over the years, aggressively pursued moms through promotion around Prime, along with loading Prime Video with kid-friendly content. As for retail stores, Amazon's acquisition of Whole Foods, which is 470 stores, along with testing the Amazon Go retail concept, is evidence that Amazon sees the future of retail as a combination of mostly online and some offline. Munster goes on to say that Amazon would potentially target a $41 billion buyout of Target. And while Target had a good fourth quarter, their stock has been basically trickling down or remaining flat for the last few years. This Target conversation, while it seems crazy, there's another connection point which makes it seem somewhat plausible. There's been rumors for the last 3 months that Amazon desperately wants to get into the pharmaceutical and medical game. And as I researched that particular news item, I found a Bloomberg article that reminded me that Bezos tried to get into the healthcare game and pharmaceutical game in 1999. At the time, Bezos invested heavily in drugstore.com. The concept ultimately failed, but Bezos has never given up on the desire for Amazon to be a one-stop shop for everything. One of the major barriers for Bezos to get into the pharmaceutical game is specific licensing and rights in each individual state. It's hard to operate a quote-unquote drugstore online, especially without physical retail locations who have those operational licenses. So if Amazon bought a Target, which has pharmacies, that could help enable his long-term pharmaceutical goals. And if not a Target, perhaps another company. It's kind of insane to think about what Amazon could do with the pharmaceutical industry. You have overnight shipping. You could have connections to all the home devices. You could tell your Alexa to order more drugs, or you could put it onto a schedule. Or hell, it's always listening to you. So maybe if there's a medical emergency, it could know to call someone. They have those dash buttons where you can automatically just click and the stuff comes. Amazon has a distribution channel already built to make pharmaceutical purchases and drugs that much more convenient to purchase. And that information ties into another interesting bit of news this week, which is that Amazon is looking for a HIPAA compliance officer. And everyone's sort of saying, well, we couldn't possibly imagine why Amazon would want a HIPAA compliance officer. This scenario certainly lends itself to needing a HIPAA officer, but it also could be something as innocent as they're trying to get more competitive in the cloud space, and they have to make sure that their environments support HIPAA compliance policy standards. So to summarize, Amazon is dominating the cloud. Amazon is dominating retail. Amazon is growing unnaturally into areas like pharmaceuticals. Maybe they'll buy a large retail firm like Target and combine it with their Whole Foods and combine it with their pharmaceutical desires. They're not only dominating e-commerce, but they're also looking to take over physical retail, physical locations. And is their ultimate ambition to take over a city? And I'm not saying take over a city with malice or with Machiavellian plans. But let's be honest, when Amazon makes a move into a new city, they're going to have a lot of clout, and the cities are bending over backwards to accommodate them. There were some small towns that were willing to change their name to Amazon. I think it was a town in Texas. It would have been Amazon, Texas. Fortunately, I'll say fortunately in this situation, those smaller towns were not considered, and Amazon released a top 20 final candidate list. I'm going to rip through these cities really quick. Atlanta, Austin, Texas, Boston, Chicago, Columbus, Ohio, Dallas, Denver, Indianapolis, Los Angeles, Miami, Montgomery County, Maryland, Nashville, Newark, New Jersey, New York City, Northern Virginia, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Raleigh, North Carolina, Toronto, and Washington, D.C. I have talked several times in this podcast about Philadelphia. We talked about the Newark, New Jersey situation and the incentive package that city put together to entice Amazon to consider them. Recently, in some of the supplier reports, I've been seeing news that Boston and Washington, D.C. are heavy favorites, especially Washington. Bezos has business interests in the city already, thanks to the Washington Post. It would likely make sense that as Amazon continues to gobble up other industries and businesses, a stronger footing in the city so he can help plead his case to the DOJ when it comes to these mergers, that makes a lot of sense. As Amazon grows, their need for lobbying and a presence in Washington is going to grow as well. CNN called out a couple of interesting trends. With the exception of Los Angeles, the West Coast wasn't really considered. And I suppose that makes sense because they already have a presence in Seattle. They definitely seem to be targeting or have a desire for the East Coast. And from a high level, that makes a lot of sense from a business continuity perspective. That's classic BCP 101, have a presence on both sides of the country. But as I go through this podcast and I go through this information, I want to remind you of SourceCast episode 97, which I talk about Amazon's work culture. I'm not going to rehash it, but obviously if I dedicated an episode to it, there's probably some negative rumors and opinions about how Amazon treats their employees. So as Amazon expands into everything, as they gobble up well-liked companies with well-liked cultures and start to transform them into Amazon subsidiaries with the Amazon culture, and I tie that to my earlier point, my earlier joke that we're all going to end up working for Amazon, as the company eliminates other retail outlets where people are finding employment, as the company makes a base in a city, I do have some concern. Even though Amazon pays well, even though Amazon is coming with good jobs, they have a burnout culture. When you read about those people living in the trailers during the holiday season to make sure that Amazon can fulfill their orders, that doesn't sound like a very bright and happy future. It's nice that those people have jobs and are getting some income, but that feels like a failure to me on a variety of levels, and it's not all on Amazon's feet. Taking this conversation back to monopolies and anti-competition, I think we have to start considering this is something entirely different. Consumers are benefiting from the actions that Amazon is making. They're driving prices down. They're making goods and materials more available and more accessible to people at lower costs. The consequence of their success is that Amazon is driving the economy. They are driving the conversation. It's an Amazon world, and we're just living in it, the bigger and bigger they get. So they're not a monopoly, but they're positioning themselves to basically have a taste of everything. Oh, I forgot to mention, there's talk that Amazon was looking to buy a bank, so they would own your mortgage. They could own your house. That opens up a lot of possibilities and conflicts. And I've been watching a lot of Black Mirror lately, so I am skewing a lot of this stuff negatively. The intent of this week's podcast is just to string together a couple of potentially stray Amazon facts and put it together into a picture. I'm not trying to be alarmist. I'm just trying to be informative and a little bit entertaining. But I hope this podcast makes you pay attention to some of Amazon's moves a little bit closer. They do want to own the world. They don't even want to own this world. They want to own the next world. Bezos owns rockets. He's like Elon Musk. He's trying to get reusable rockets out into space. So when we run out of water and raw materials, he's going to mine asteroids. That dude really is taking over the world.
And that's all we have for this week. You can find SourceCast on iTunes, Google Music, and all of your favorite podcasting applications. SourceCast is recorded in Bucolic, Mantua, New Jersey, and it's produced by my dad. The outro is performed by me, Ben Lombardi, and music is provided by Patrick Lee. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.